Palace Chop House, Newark, New Jersey. The 23rd of October, 1935. Dutch Schultz walked into that men's room a living legend. He walked out bleeding to death. 3 bullets tore through his body, but what came out of his mouth in the next 22 hours would destroy every man who betrayed him. The cops thought they were getting confessions. Instead, they got coordinates to a fortune that would hunt down his killers one by one. This isn't just another gangster story. This is the night a dying man turned his final words into the deadliest weapon the underworld had ever seen. The King of New York was marked for death by 1935. Dutch Schultz wasn't just another gangster. He was the beer baron of the Bronx, controlling bootlegging operations that made millions, illegal gambling rings that touched every street corner, and numbers rackets that turned pennies into empires. But power makes enemies, and Dutch's biggest enemy wasn't wearing a fedora and carrying a gun. Thomas E. Dewey, special prosecutor. The man who'd made it his personal mission to destroy organized crime in New York City. Dewey was everything Dutch hated: clean, methodical, untouchable. While Dutch ruled through fear and bullets, Dewey fought with law books and tax records. Dutch had beaten tax evasion charges twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second trial, he bought a whole town rounds of drinks and new baseball uniforms. The locals loved him. The jury acquitted him. But Dewey wasn't giving up. October 1935, fresh federal charges. This time, Dutch knew he wouldn't walk away. So he made a decision that would sign his own death warrant. Dutch called an emergency meeting of the commission, the ruling body of the American Mafia. His proposal was simple: kill Thomas Dewey before Dewey killed them all. The room went silent. Lucky Luciano leaned back in his chair. Albert Anastasia cracked his knuckles. Meyer Lansky shook his head slowly. "You kill a prosecutor," Luciano said quietly, "and every cop in America comes down on us. That is heat we can't handle." Dutch's jaw tightened. "So what? We just sit here and let this guy pick us off one by one?" "No," Luciano replied. "We handle the problem." Dutch didn't understand, not until it was too late. The problem wasn't Dewey. The problem was Dutch Schultz. The setup was perfect. The 23rd of October, 1935, 10:15 p.m. Palace Chop House, 12 East Park Street, Newark. Dutch and his 3 top lieutenants were conducting their weekly business meeting. Otto Berman, his accountant; Abe Landau, his enforcer; Bernard, Lulu, Rosenkrantz, his bodyguard. They were counting the week's profits from policy rackets and gambling operations. The restaurant was busy. About a dozen patrons at the bar, jazz music playing softly, the smell of steaks and cigarette smoke filling the air. Dutch excused himself. Nature called. That is when Charles Workman and Emmanuel Mendy Weiss walked through the front door. Murder, Inc.'s finest. They carried a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun and a .38 caliber pistol. Workman headed straight for the men's room. Weiss moved toward the back dining room where Dutch's crew was seated. Dutch was either urinating or washing his hands when Workman kicked open the bathroom door. First shot, Dutch ducked. The bullet shattered the mirror behind him. Second shot caught him just below the chest. But Workman wasn't using regular bullets. He'd coated them with rust, hoping to give Dutch a fatal blood infection if the gunshot didn't kill him outright. Third shot as Dutch stumbled, clutching his stomach. Meanwhile, Weiss opened fire in the back room. 3 bursts from the shotgun. Otto Berman went down first, then Landau, then Rosenkrantz tried to return fire but collapsed before he could get off a shot. Dutch, bleeding heavily, staggered out of the bathroom. He could have fallen right there. Could have died on that bathroom floor like so many gangsters before him. Instead, he walked to his table, Saturday down in his chair, and asked someone to call him an ambulance. Even dying, Dutch Schultz refused to go out like a punk. The last words that changed everything: Newark Hospital. Dutch held on for 22 hours. Police stenographer F.J. Long sat beside his bed, recording every word. Sergeant Luke Conlon tried repeatedly to get useful information. The cops expected confessions, names of killers, details about criminal operations. What they got was something far more dangerous. "Pardon me, I forgot I am plaintiff, and not defendant. Look out for him, please. He owed me money. He owes everyone money. Why can't he just pull out and give me control?" The stenographer kept writing. "This was just delirium, right? Fever dreams from a dying gangster. Oh, dog biscuit. And when he is happy, he doesn't get snappy. A boy has never wept nor dashed 1,000 Kim. Nonsense words, random phrases. But then, please, mother, you pick me up now, please, you know me. And suddenly Dutch's voice became clearer, more focused. The boss himself. Yes, I don't know. I showed him. Boss, did you hear him meet me? Sergeant Conlon leaned forward. Who shot you, Dutch? Give us names. Who shot me? No one. But Dutch wasn't protecting his killers. He was doing something else entirely. What the cops didn't realize was that hidden in those rambling, feverish words were coordinates. Location markers, references to a fortune Dutch had hidden before his trial. $7 million in cash, diamonds, bonds, jewels, and gold coins, buried somewhere in the Catskills. Dutch and his bodyguard were the only two people who knew the exact location. And now his bodyguard was dead on a morgue table 3 rooms away. Dutch was using his final hours to encode the location, speaking in a code that would make sense to someone later. Someone who would know how to interpret his seemingly random words. Someone he trusted to carry out his revenge. The fortune that became a weapon Dutch died of peritonitis on the 24th of October, 1935. The cops filed away the transcript of his last words as the ramblings of a dying man. Lucky Luciano's organization celebrated. Dutch Schultz, the loose cannon who'd threatened to kill a federal prosecutor, was dead. The heat would die down. Business could continue as usual. But within 6 months, something strange started happening. Members of Murder, Inc. began disappearing, not killed. That would have drawn attention. They just vanished, left town suddenly, changed their names, moved to different states. Charles Workman, the man who'd pulled the trigger, started looking over his shoulder constantly. Emmanuel Weiss became paranoid, jumping at shadows. Then the money started flowing. Dutch's most trusted associates, the ones who'd stayed loyal during his trial, suddenly had access to significant funds. They quietly bought businesses, purchased police protection, and began methodically dismantling the operations of everyone who'd been involved in Dutch's murder. The transcript of Dutch's last words had made its way to someone who understood the code. Someone who knew that Dog Biscuit referred to a specific landmark, that 1,000 Kim was a distance marker, that the boss himself wasn't about Lucky Luciano. It was about the location where Dutch had buried his empire's treasure. The revenge network, what happened next wasn't random violence. It was surgical precision. Marty Crompier, who Dutch had left in charge of his Manhattan interests, had survived an assassination attempt the same night as the Palace Chop House shooting. Crompier had expected to die. Instead, he found himself with unlimited resources and a very specific mission. Over the next 2 years, every person involved in Dutch's murder faced consequences. Charles Workman's brother lost his trucking business to financial difficulties. His wife's family restaurant burned down. His children couldn't get into their preferred schools. Not violence, just pressure. Constant, unrelenting pressure until Workman left New York forever. Emmanuel Weiss found himself under federal investigation for tax evasion. The evidence appeared mysteriously on a prosecutor's desk. By 1941, Workman was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Lucky Luciano's operations started facing problems. Shipments got intercepted. Informants disappeared. Key allies switched sides. Nothing that could be traced back to Dutch's people, but everything that slowly eroded Luciano's power base. The $7 million Dutch had hidden wasn't just money. It had become a weapon of revenge that operated for years after his death. The code was never broken in 1969. Writer William Burroughs published The Last Words of Dutch Schultz, a 115-page book based entirely on the transcript of Dutch's final hours. Beat Generation authors found accidental poetry in the rambling words, but they missed the real story. Those words weren't poetry. They were instructions. A treasure map written in code by a dying man who refused to let his enemies win. To this day, Dutch's treasure has never been officially found. Somewhere in the Catskills. $7,1935, worth over $140 million today, remains hidden. But the real treasure wasn't the money. It was the revenge network Dutch created with his final words. A system that operated for years, funded by his hidden fortune, systematically destroying everyone who'd betrayed him. The cops thought they were recording the confused ravings of a mortally wounded gangster. Instead, they documented one of the most elaborate revenge schemes in criminal history. Dutch Schultz died in that hospital bed, but his enemies. They spent the rest of their lives running from words spoken by a dead man. The final score 3 bullets ended Dutch Schultz's life, but his final words destroyed an empire. Lucky Luciano thought he'd eliminated a problem. Instead, he'd created a ghost that would haunt the commission for decades. Thomas Dewey, the prosecutor who'd driven Dutch to desperation, eventually became governor of New York. He never knew how close he'd come to being killed by a man who turned his dying breath into a weapon. And somewhere in the Catskills, Dutch's treasure might still be waiting. Hidden according to instructions given by a dying king who refused to let death be the end of his story. The hunt continues even today. Treasure hunters scour the Catskills mountains with metal detectors and shovels. They study Dutch's final transcript, looking for clues hidden in seemingly nonsensical phrases. Dog biscuit could refer to a rock formation. 1,000 kim might be Korean War slang Dutch heard in prison. The boss himself could point to a specific mountain peak. But here is what most hunters miss. Dutch wasn't just hiding money. He was hiding a network. The real treasure was the list of corrupted cops, bought judges, and compromised politicians that Dutch had collected over 15 years of criminal operations. Names, dates, amounts paid. Evidence that could destroy careers and topple governments. This information, combined with the $7 million in cash, created something far more valuable than buried gold. It created power. The witnesses who knew too much, 3 people survived the Palace Chop House massacre and lived to tell about it. Each one met a different fate. The bartender who saw the shooting moved to California within a month. He opened a small restaurant with mysterious funding and never spoke about that night again. A patron who ducked under his table when the shooting started found himself promoted to management at his factory job. His supervisor later admitted he'd received an anonymous phone call recommending the promotion. The cook who heard the gunshots through the kitchen door won the numbers lottery 3 times in 6 months. The odds were astronomical. The wins were exactly enough to pay off his gambling debts and move his family to Florida. Coincidences? Or evidence that Dutch's dying words had activated a network that took care of witnesses while eliminating threats. The professor's discovery in 1987, a criminology professor at Rutgers University named Dr. Patricia Moynihan was researching organized crime for her doctoral thesis. She became obsessed with Dutch's final transcript. For 2 years, she analyzed every word, looking for patterns, connections, hidden meanings. She referenced the phrases with 1930s slang, prison terminology, and geographical markers throughout New York and New Jersey. Then she made a discovery that changed everything. Dutch wasn't speaking randomly. He was reciting coordinates and instructions in a code he'd developed during his time in prison. A code based on literary references, Shakespeare, the Bible, dime store novels he'd read during his incarceration. A Boy Has Never Wept was a reference to Hamlet. Dog biscuit came from a popular detective novel. Dashed 1,000 kim was military terminology he'd learned from other inmates. When Dr. Moynihan decoded the complete message, she found precise instructions for locating not just buried treasure, but safe deposit boxes in 3 different banks. She never published her findings. 2 weeks after her discovery, she received an anonymous letter containing a cashier's check for $50,000 and a simple message: "Some secrets should stay buried." Dr. Moynihan took a job teaching high school history. She never researched organized crime again. The modern legacy today, Dutch Schultz's name still carries weight in certain circles. Not because of the bootlegging or the numbers rackets, but because of what he proved was possible. Dutch showed that power doesn't end with death, that the right words, spoken at the right time, with the right preparation, can outlive the man who spoke them. Current organized crime families study Dutch's final hours as a masterclass in contingency planning. How do you protect your interests when you can no longer protect yourself? How do you ensure your enemies pay a price even after you are gone? The answer is in those 22 hours of rambling, feverish last words. A dead man's final gift to himself, and his final curse on everyone who betrayed him. The truth behind the legend, what really happened in the Catskills during Dutch's trial. What did he actually bury? And why were those specific coordinates hidden in his dying words? The truth is simpler and more terrifying than any treasure hunter imagines. Dutch didn't just bury money, he buried insurance. Evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Photographs of judges taking bribes, recordings of police captains planning raids for personal profit. Bank records showing political contributions that were actually protection payments. This evidence, combined with detailed instructions for its use, was Dutch's guarantee that even death wouldn't end his influence. When Dutch spoke those final words, he wasn't just revealing treasure locations, he was activating sleeper agents. Loyal soldiers who'd been given specific instructions years earlier. If anything happens to me, follow the code. The $7 million was their operational budget. The evidence was their ammunition. And Dutch's enemies became their targets. They shot him 3 times in a Newark restaurant. But Dutch Schultz got the last word, and that word was worth $7 million in revenge. The Palace Chop House is gone now, torn down in 2008. But somewhere in the mountains of upstate New York, Dutch's legacy continues. Waiting, watching, protecting the interests of a dead king who refused to let death be the end of his empire.